Moonlit secrets and whispers in the dark. A mystery unfolds. The town of Silverpine slept quietly under the pale glow of the moon. Mist curled through the narrow cobblestone streets like restless spirits, whispering against the windows of old houses that seemed to hold their breath. The air was still, yet heavy, as if something unseen lingered in the shadows, waiting for someone to listen. At the far end of the town stood an ancient mansion, half hidden by tall oak trees and ivy that had claimed its walls long ago. Locals called it Moonridge House, a place spoken of only in hushed tones. They said that at midnight, faint voices could be heard from its halls. Some said it was the wind, others claimed it was the house remembering its past. No one dared to go near it anymore. No one except Clara, a young journalist from the city, drawn by stories of mysteries that refused to die. She arrived in Silverpine one cold evening, her notebook in hand, her heart beating with both excitement and unease. Clara had always been fascinated by secrets, not the kind found in books or archives, but the ones that lived in silence, waiting to be uncovered. When she first read about Moonridge House and the disappearance of its last resident, Eleanor Ray, 30 years ago, she knew this was the story she had been waiting for. She checked into a small inn near the edge of town. The woman at the counter, Mrs. Lyle, looked at her with wary eyes as soon as Clara mentioned her reason for visiting. "You're not going up there, are you?" Mrs. Lyle asked, her voice trembling slightly. "That house doesn't welcome visitors." Clara smiled gently. "I'm just here to learn the truth, nothing more." "The truth," Mrs. Lyle muttered, turning the key in her hand, "is buried deep under that moonlight, dear. And sometimes it's better left there." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The wind outside seemed to carry faint murmurs, not quite words, but close. She opened the window and looked toward the hill where Moonridge stood. A faint light flickered in one of its windows, though the house was supposed to be abandoned. Her breath caught. Someone or something was inside. The next morning, Clara walked through the market square, hoping to speak with the townsfolk. Most avoided her gaze. But one old man, sitting near the fountain, called out softly, "You're here for the Ray mystery, aren't you?" Clara turned, startled. "You know about it?" He nodded slowly. His face was lined with age, his eyes clouded with memory. Eleanor Ray was a kind soul, loved by everyone. But one night, she vanished. No note, no trace. They searched the woods, the river, even the old mine. Nothing. Some say she was taken. Others say she never left the house at all. Clara wrote down every word, her pen trembling slightly. "What do you believe happened?" she asked. The man stared at her for a long moment, then whispered, "Sometimes the house keeps what it loves. And sometimes it keeps what it fears." Later that evening, Clara packed her camera and recorder and made her way up the winding road to Moonridge House. The air grew colder with every step. The trees seemed to bend inward, their branches whispering secrets she couldn't understand. When she reached the gates, they creaked open on their own, as if the house had been waiting for her. She hesitated, then stepped inside. The garden was wild, overgrown with vines and thorns. Statues stood half-buried in moss, their faces eroded into strange, sorrowful expressions. The front door loomed before her, tall, cracked, and carved with intricate symbols she didn't recognize. Inside, the air was thick with dust and silence. Her footsteps echoed through the grand hallway, where faded portraits watched her with eyes that seemed too alive. A chandelier hung above her, swaying ever so slightly, though there was no wind. She whispered to herself, "Just an old house." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. As she moved deeper into the house, she found a large piano in the drawing room. A thin layer of dust covered the keys, yet one of them, the middle C, was clean, as if recently touched. Clara felt her pulse quicken. Someone had been here. She lifted her camera, took a few photos, and then noticed something else, a faint melody. It drifted from upstairs, soft and broken, like a lullaby played through tears. Clara froze, her hand tightening around the flashlight. "Hello," she called, her voice echoing through the empty corridors. The music stopped. Only the sound of her heartbeat filled the silence. Then, faintly, a whisper, just a breath, brushed past her ear. "Leave before the moon rises." Clara spun around, the beam of her flashlight cutting through the dark. No one was there. The air felt colder now, heavy with unseen eyes. She backed toward the hallway, forcing her breath to stay steady. At that moment, something caught her attention, a glimmer beneath the piano. She crouched down and reached for it. Her fingers brushed against a small silver locket, its chain tangled and worn. She opened it carefully. Inside was a faded photograph of a woman with soft eyes and a gentle smile, Eleanor Ray. Clara's hand trembled. "You're still here," she whispered. Just then, a sudden thud echoed from the upper floor. Then another. Slow, deliberate steps, moving toward the stairs. Clara froze, clutching the locket. The whispers began again, faint, overlapping, as though the walls themselves were speaking. "Find the letter. Don't trust the mirror. She's watching." Her flashlight flickered once, then went out. The darkness closed in around her like a living thing. And through it all, the faint sound of a piano began again, a single note repeating again and again, middle C. Clara stood very still, her breath shallow. She realized something chilling. The piano was playing itself. She took a step back toward the door, but it slammed shut with a deafening bang. And then, silence. The moonlight spilled through the cracked window, falling on the grand staircase. For a moment, Clara thought she saw a shadow at the top, the faint outline of a woman in an old dress, her head tilted, her lips moving soundlessly. Then, as the clock struck midnight, the shadow vanished. Clara whispered into the dark, her voice trembling, "Eleanor, what happened to you?" The house seemed to sigh, a low, mournful sound that came from deep within its walls. Then came the whisper again, clearer this time, closer. "Find me before he does." Clara's heart stopped. There was someone else here. The morning light crept slowly through the window of Clara's room, washing away the chill of the previous night. Yet no warmth could reach the cold weight in her chest. She hadn't slept a minute. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard that whisper again. "Find me before he does." She replayed the events over and over in her mind. The piano, the shadow, the locket with Eleanor's face. It was all too vivid to be a dream. She had proof. The locket was real, lying now on the small wooden table beside her notebook. She traced her finger over it gently. On the back, almost invisible in the dull morning light, she noticed something engraved. For E, forever under the moonlight. Clara frowned. The initials were simple, but the words hinted at a secret bond. "For E," she murmured. Who gave this to her? She needed answers. After breakfast, she went back into town. The streets were quiet, and people seemed to move around her like shadows avoiding the sun. When she asked about Eleanor, most looked away. But one woman, Martha, who ran the old bookstore near the square, stopped her. "You shouldn't have gone up there," Martha said softly, setting down a stack of books. "That house isn't safe. It never was." "I know the stories," Clara replied. "But I need facts. I need to understand what really happened to Eleanor Ray." Martha hesitated, glancing at the empty street outside. Eleanor was special. She came from a city to care for her sick uncle. But she was lonely. The only person who visited her often was a man named Julian Hale, the caretaker of the estate. "Caretaker?" Clara repeated. "Is he still alive?" Martha nodded slowly. "He lives near the forest, just past the river bend. Keeps to himself. People say he still goes up to the mansion sometimes." Clara thanked her and left immediately. The road toward the forest was narrow and damp, covered in fallen leaves. The air smelled of pine and rain. After a long walk, she found a small cottage hidden among the trees. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a tall man stood outside, chopping wood. He looked up as she approached. His hair was gray, his face lined, but his eyes were sharp, eyes that had seen too much. "You're trespassing," he said gruffly, setting down the axe. "I'm sorry," Clara replied. "My name is Clara." I'm a journalist, and I'm investigating what happened to Eleanor Ray. For a moment, he said nothing. Then his expression darkened. There's nothing to investigate. She's gone. I was at the house last night, Clara said carefully. I found her locket. His hands froze. His eyes narrowed. You went inside?
Yes.
I heard music and whispers. Julian's face turned pale. He stepped closer, his voice low and tense. You shouldn't have gone there. The house doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive. Clara frowned. What do you mean by that? Julian turned away, his hands trembling slightly. Eleanor wasn't the first. That house, it feeds on memories.
On grief.
People think it's haunted, but it's worse than that. It's alive in a way. It remembers every secret it's been told, and it keeps them trapped. Clara felt a chill creep up her spine. You make it sound like the house took her. He looked at her then, his eyes haunted. Maybe it did. Or maybe it was him. Who? Clara pressed. Julian's voice dropped to a whisper. The man who built it, Arthur Ray. Eleanor's uncle. He was obsessed with life after death. He filled that mansion with strange rooms, mirrors that never reflected right, doors that led nowhere, whispers in the walls. When he died, something stayed behind, and it's been waiting ever since. Clara took a step back, her heartbeat quickening. Do you still go there? He hesitated, then nodded. Sometimes. I leave flowers in the old library. Eleanor loved that room. Would you take me there? He shook his head immediately. No. I can't go back. The last time I did, I heard her singing. There was silence between them, heavy, suffocating. Then Julian turned and went inside the cottage, leaving Clara standing alone in the damp air. As she made her way back down the path, she couldn't shake his words. It feeds on memories. That night, Clara sat by the window of her room again, staring at the locket in her palm. The moonlight glinted on its surface, and for a moment, she thought she saw something move inside the reflection, a faint silhouette of a woman's face. She gasped and dropped it. The locket hit the floor with a soft chime and fell open. Inside, the photograph had changed. Eleanor's face was the same, but now her eyes seemed to be looking directly at Clara, and in the background of the image, faint but unmistakable, was the grand piano. The same piano that had played on its own. Clara's breath caught. She picked up her recorder and pressed play. She had left it running while she explored the house the night before. Most of the audio was static, but then, faintly, she heard something else, a woman's voice singing softly, then whispering her name. Clara. She froze. That wasn't possible. How could Eleanor know her name? Suddenly, a knock came at her door. She jumped. Who is it? She called out. No answer. Just silence. She opened the door slowly. The hallway was empty, except for a small folded note lying on the floor. She picked it up and read. Don't go back alone. The mirror remembers. There was no signature, but at the bottom, faintly, was a smudge like a fingerprint made of soot. Clara sat down, her hands shaking. Every warning she had been given echoed in her mind. Still, deep inside, her curiosity burned stronger than her fear. She knew she had to return. Not tomorrow, not later, tonight. As the moon rose once again over Silverpine, she packed her things quietly, flashlight, camera, notebook, recorder, and set out toward the hill. The path looked different now, swallowed by mist. Every step echoed softly on the stones. When she reached the gates of Moonridge House, they opened again, slow and deliberate, as if recognizing her. The same haunting melody floated on the cold air, the piano playing a few broken notes. Inside, the air was colder than before. Dust floated in the moonlight like silver snow. Clara's flashlight trembled in her hand as she walked through the grand hall, past the portraits that seemed to follow her every move. She found her way to the library, the one Julian had mentioned. It was vast, filled with shelves of old books, their spines cracked and faded. In the corner stood a tall mirror framed in dark wood, its surface fogged and rippling slightly, like water disturbed by a breeze. Clara stepped closer. Her reflection looked back, pale, uncertain, but behind her reflection, something moved. A woman, standing just over her shoulder. Clara spun around, but the room was empty. Her heart pounded. Slowly, she turned back to the mirror. The woman was still there, clearer now. Eleanor Ray. Her lips moved silently, forming words Clara could barely make out. Find the letter. Then the mirror cracked. A sharp, echoing sound filled the room. Clara stumbled backward, her flashlight flickering wildly. The air grew thick. The walls seemed to hum with energy. From somewhere deep in the house came a sound, a door slamming shut, then another and another, as if the mansion itself was sealing her in. The whispers grew louder. Find the letter. Before he returns? Clara turned toward the stairs, gripping her flashlight. Somewhere above, faint footsteps echoed, steady, deliberate, coming closer. She ran toward the hall, her breath quick and shallow. As she reached the bottom of the staircase, she froze. A shadow stood there, tall, thin, motionless. It wasn't Eleanor. It wasn't anyone she knew. The shadow spoke in a low, gravelly voice. You shouldn't have come back. Clara stepped back, trembling. Who are you? The figure tilted its head slightly. The keeper of her silence. Then, everything went dark. When Clara opened her eyes, everything was silent. The air smelled of dust and age, and her head throbbed with a dull ache. She was lying on the cold marble floor of Moonridge House, the flashlight beside her flickering weakly. For a moment, she couldn't remember what had happened. Then the memories flooded back. The mirror, the whisper, the shadow. She sat up quickly, her breath sharp in her throat. The house was darker now, the moonlight barely touching the corners of the vast hall. Her recorder lay broken near the stairs. Her camera was gone. Panic rose in her chest. Hello, she called, her voice echoing through the emptiness. No reply, only the faint creak of old wood and the distant hum of the wind pressing against the walls. Clara took a deep breath and forced herself to stand. Her body trembled, but she was not leaving. Not yet. She had come too far. Eleanor's whispers had called her here for a reason. She needed to find the letter. She turned on her flashlight again and began to explore. The beam cut through the thick darkness, revealing fragments of old paintings, torn curtains, and forgotten furniture. Every shadow seemed to move slightly when she wasn't looking. When she reached the end of the corridor, she saw a door she hadn't noticed before, small, wooden, and carved with the same strange symbols that had been on the front gate. She pushed it open slowly. Inside was a small room filled with dust-covered objects, an old writing desk, shelves of ledgers, and a cracked oil lamp. On the wall hung a portrait of Arthur Ray, Eleanor's uncle. His cold eyes seemed to follow her, painted in a shade of gray that almost glowed in the dark. Clara approached the desk. The drawers were locked, but one had been pried open long ago. Inside, she found scattered papers, some letters, torn and faded, others blank but covered in smudges that looked like fingerprints. Then, beneath them all, she found a sealed envelope. It was old, yellowed, and fragile. Across the front, in elegant handwriting, were the words, "To whoever seeks the truth." Her heart pounded. She broke the seal and unfolded the letter carefully. The ink was faded, but she could still make out the words. To the one who dares to look beyond the veil. There is something you must know. The house remembers. It listens to every whisper and breathes in every sorrow. Arthur sought to bind his soul to this place, fearing death more than sin. He succeeded, and in doing so, he trapped us all. If you are reading this, the curse still holds. There is only one way to break it. Find the mirror of truth and speak the name he fears most, his own. But beware, he walks in the house when the moon is full. Do not look directly into his eyes. Eleanor. Clara stared at the letter, her pulse racing. It was true. The shadow she had seen wasn't a ghost. It was Arthur Ray himself, bound to the mansion. The mirror she saw earlier must be the mirror of truth. But it had cracked. Could it still work? Before she could think further, A sudden cold gust blew through the room, scattering the papers. The door behind her creaked shut on its own. Then came the whisper again, soft, desperate, near her ear. "Clara, hurry, he knows you're here." "Eleanor." Clara breathed, spinning around. The room was empty, but the temperature had dropped. Her breath came out in white mist. She stuffed the letter into her pocket and ran out into the hallway. The lights flickered, and from somewhere above, she heard footsteps, heavy, slow, and deliberate. The air vibrated faintly, as if the entire mansion was waking. Clara moved quickly, retracing her steps toward the library. She had to find the mirror again. She reached the large double doors, but when she pushed them open, the room looked different. The shelves were taller, the windows bricked over, and the mirror was whole again. She stepped closer, her reflection trembling in the wavering light. "Eleanor," she whispered, "if you can hear me, show me what to do." Her reflection flickered. Then, behind it, Eleanor's face appeared, pale, translucent, her eyes full of sorrow. "Speak his name," she whispered. "Arthur Ray," Clara said aloud. The mirror rippled like water, and suddenly the reflection behind her changed. The dark figure appeared again, taller now, closer, its face hidden in shadow. Clara's voice shook. "Arthur Ray," she shouted again. The figure paused. The air grew heavier, almost suffocating. Then it spoke, its voice a rasp that echoed through the glass. "You do not belong here." "I'm not afraid of you," Clara said, though her knees trembled. The figure moved closer, its eyes faintly glowing beneath the shadow. "Eleanor thought she could escape me. She was wrong. And so are you." Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out the letter. "She told me the truth," she said. "You trapped her. You trapped yourself." The shadow's voice turned to a snarl. "She betrayed me. She broke the vow." "What vow?" Clara demanded. Arthur's voice softened, almost mournful. "She promised she would stay. But she wanted the world beyond the gates. I couldn't let her go." "You killed her," Clara whispered. The air cracked like thunder. The mirror surface shuddered violently. "No," Arthur roared. "I saved her. I gave her eternity." The glass began to splinter, and light poured out from the cracks. Eleanor's voice rose within it, faint but defiant. "You call this eternity? You call this love?" Clara shielded her eyes as the mirror shattered completely, shards flying across the room like silver rain. When she looked up again, the shadow was gone. Only silence remained. For a moment, Clara thought it was over. Then she noticed something glowing faintly on the wall, a hidden door revealed behind where the mirror had been. She stepped closer. A faint hum came from beyond it. Carefully, she pushed it open. Behind the wall was a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air that rose from below was colder than before, thick with the scent of damp stone. Clara hesitated, then switched on her flashlight and began to descend. The stairs twisted downward endlessly until finally she reached a small underground chamber. In the center stood a stone pedestal with a glass box on top. Inside the box was a journal bound in dark leather, the name Arthur Ray etched on its cover. Clara reached out and opened the box. The pages were filled with neat, obsessive handwriting. She skimmed through them, her breath quickening. July 5th. The ritual is complete. The house breathes with me now. August 19th. Eleanor doubts me. She says the whispers frighten her. I told her they are only echoes of my soul. September 2nd. She tried to leave. The house would not allow it. September 3rd. The piano played by itself again. She cries in the library. The house is jealous. It loves her too much. Clara's stomach twisted. She turned the page. The last entry was written in jagged letters. If she will not stay with me in life, she will stay in memory. As she read the final line, the piano began to play again, distant but echoing through the walls. Then came Eleanor's voice, faint, pleading. "Help me, Clara, free me." The journal trembled in her hands. The words on the page began to blur, bleeding into each other until one sentence stood out, written in fresh, wet ink. He is awake. Clara's flashlight flickered. She looked up. At the far end of the chamber, a shadow began to rise, darker than the darkness around it, forming slowly into the shape of a man. Arthur Ray had returned. "Leave her," Clara whispered, backing away. "Let her go." Arthur's voice was cold and broken. "She belongs to me. And now, so do you." The floor trembled. The walls pulsed with a heartbeat that wasn't her own. The whispers grew louder, 1,000 voices all crying out at once. Clara clutched the journal tightly and ran up the stairs, the shadow following close behind. The house shook, the doors slamming open and shut as she raced through the halls. When she reached the main door, it refused to budge. Arthur's voice echoed from all around her, closer, angrier. "You can't leave. You're part of the story now." She screamed, pressing her hands against the door. "Eleanor, help me." Then, for the first time, she felt a soft hand on her shoulder. She turned, and there was Eleanor, standing beside her, glowing faintly like moonlight through glass. "Take the journal," Eleanor whispered. "Burn it under the moon. That's the only way." "What about you?" Clara asked, tears in her eyes. Eleanor smiled faintly. "If he fades, so will I." The shadow loomed closer, its form breaking apart into smoke and whispers. Eleanor looked at Clara once more and said softly, "Thank you." Then, in a blinding flash of white light, the front door burst open. Clara stumbled out into the night, clutching the journal to her chest as the house roared behind her like a dying beast. The last thing she saw before she ran down the hill was Moonridge House collapsing in on itself, the windows shattering, the walls crumbling, the whispers finally fading into silence. But the moon above shone brighter than ever, as if it, too, was finally free. The night air bit sharply at Clara's skin as she stumbled down the hill, clutching Arthur Ray's journal to her chest. Behind her, Moonridge House groaned and cracked, collapsing inward with the sound of ancient bones breaking. The sky above Silverpine glowed with a pale, silver light. The moon hung low and full, silent witness to the end of a secret that had lived far too long. Clara didn't stop running until the house was nothing but a memory behind her. She reached the river at the edge of town and fell to her knees, breathing hard. Her hands shook as she opened the journal again. The ink still pulsed faintly on the last page. "He is awake." Even after the house had fallen, the words hadn't faded. That terrified her. The whisper of Eleanor's last words echoed in her mind. "Burn it under the moon." Clara looked up at the night sky. The moonlight shimmered across the river's surface, casting a trembling reflection. She gathered a few dry twigs and branches from the riverbank, piled them into a small mound, and struck a match. The flame flickered weakly at first, then grew stronger, brighter, alive. She held the journal over the fire. The old leather cover seemed to resist her at first, like it didn't want to burn. The flame licked the edges, but left the center untouched. Then the wind shifted, carrying with it a low whisper. Arthur's voice. "Do you think it's that easy?" Clara froze. The voice wasn't coming from her mind. It was real, echoing softly from the trees around her. She turned in every direction, but the forest was still. The shadows between the trunks twisted and stretched, as if something moved just beyond her sight. She clenched her teeth and dropped the journal into the fire. The flames hissed, then surged higher, turning from orange to a ghostly blue. The pages curled and blackened, the ink bleeding out like veins dissolving. And then she saw her, Eleanor. The spirit appeared just beyond the flames, her face soft, her eyes glimmering with tears. "Thank you, Clara," she said, her voice faint, carried on the wind. "You freed me." Clara's heart ached. "What happens now?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "I go where he cannot follow." But before she could fade completely, the wind howled. The blue fire flared violently, and from the burning journal came a scream, long, echoing, and filled with rage. The ground trembled. Arthur's voice rose again, louder, furious. "You can burn the book, but not the memory. I am the house, the stone, the shadow." The flames exploded outward, forcing Clara back. She shielded her face, coughing as smoke and ash surrounded her. When the light dimmed, the journal was gone, reduced to blackened dust. Eleanor's figure shimmered, flickered, and then vanished with the wind. For a long moment, the forest was silent again. Only the sound of the river remained, calm and eternal. Clara sank to her knees, exhausted. She had done it. The curse was broken. Or so she thought. The next morning, the town of Silverpine stirred with uneasy whispers. The villagers spoke of strange lights on the hill and the sound of a woman's voice singing through the night. Some said the curse had been lifted. Others said it had merely changed its form. Clara walked through the town square, weary but determined. She needed to tell Julian Hale what had happened. He deserved to know that Eleanor was finally at peace. She found his cottage by the forest. Smoke still rose from the chimney, and the faint smell of wood filled the air. She knocked softly. No answer. "Julian," she called. After a moment, the door creaked open. Inside, the cottage was dim and quiet. A single candle burned on the table, beside an old photograph, Julian and Eleanor, young and smiling. Clara felt her chest tighten. They had known each other deeply, perhaps more than anyone had guessed. On the table lay another note, written in a shaky hand. "She visits me in dreams. The house may fall, but memories never die." Clara looked around the room and froze. The mirror above the fireplace was cracked. The same kind of crack she had seen in Moonridge House. Her pulse quickened. "No," she whispered. The reflection in the glass shimmered faintly. For a brief moment, she saw Eleanor's face, not sorrowful, but warning. Then it vanished. Julian appeared suddenly from the back room, his eyes hollow, his voice distant. "You shouldn't have burned it," he said quietly. "The fire freed him too." Clara stepped back. "What do you mean?" Julian's lips trembled. "The journal didn't bind Arthur. It contained him. It was his prison." The air seemed to thicken around them. Clara's stomach dropped. "No." Julian nodded slowly. "Now he's free again, but not bound to the house anymore." Before Clara could respond, the candle flickered violently. The flames stretched upward, forming the faint outline of a man's face, eyes hollow, mouth twisted in fury. Arthur Ray's voice seeped from the shadows. "You thought you could destroy me, little seeker," he whispered. "But the curse only changes shape. The moon sees all, and she remembers." The windows shattered, the air turned freezing cold. Clara grabbed Julian's arm, pulling him toward the door. They stumbled outside, gasping as the wind howled around them. The trees bent, groaning like living things. "Run!" Clara shouted. They ran through the woods, branches clawing at their clothes. Behind them, a deep, echoing laugh rolled through the forest, not loud, but everywhere at once. When they reached the road to town, they collapsed breathless. The wind died instantly. The forest returned to silence. Julian sat trembling, his hands buried in his hair. "He's not gone, Clara. He's found another vessel." Clara swallowed hard. "A vessel?" Julian turned toward her slowly. His eyes were full of fear and something else. Resignation. "He's inside me." Clara's breath caught. "No, Julian." He held up a shaking hand. "I can feel him. His voice, his thoughts, he's here." "Then we'll find a way," Clara said desperately. "There has to be something." Julian smiled weakly. "You already did what she couldn't. You gave her peace. Now give me the same." Before Clara could stop him, he pulled a small silver dagger from his coat, old, engraved with strange symbols. She tried to grab it, but he stepped back. "Tell the world the truth," he said softly. "And tell her I kept my promise." Then, before Clara could move, he drove the blade into his own chest. "Julian," she screamed, catching him as he fell. The wind rose again, and from his lips came Arthur's final whisper, faint, breaking apart with the breath of a dying man. "You can't kill memory." Then, silence. Clara wept quietly as she held Julian's lifeless body in her arms. The silver dagger slipped from his hand, glowing faintly under the moonlight. For a long time, she stayed there, the forest surrounding her like a cathedral of shadows. When she finally looked up, she noticed something strange. The moon, full and bright a moment ago, was now half hidden by clouds. And in its dim light, the shadows of the trees seemed to stretch toward her, almost like hands reaching from the dark. She picked up the dagger and stared at its reflection. For an instant, she saw not her own face, but Arthur's, smiling faintly from within the blade. Clara dropped it immediately, her heart pounding. The echo of his laughter followed her all the way back to the inn. That night, she sat by the window, staring at the moon. It was quieter now, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the whispering hadn't truly stopped. Somewhere beyond the wind, she could still hear it, faint and cold. You can't kill memory. And deep down, she knew it was true. The house was gone. The journal was ash. But the curse had found a new home, not in wood or stone, but in the hearts of those who had seen the truth. Clara looked at her notebook. She had recorded everything. Every sound, every word, every mystery. She could tell the world. She could expose it all. But as she lifted her pen, she hesitated. What if writing it down only gave it new life? What if the story itself was the curse? Her hand trembled. The ink dripped onto the page, forming one final line before she closed the book. The moon remembers. She blew out the candle and sat in the darkness, listening. And in the quiet that followed, from somewhere far beyond the night, came a soft, familiar voice, a whisper beneath the breath of the wind. Clara, her eyes widened. She wasn't alone. The wind howled through Moonridge House, as if mourning the weight of the truth that had finally been unearthed. The walls trembled softly, dust drifting like ancient snow from the ceiling beams. Clara stood in the center of the grand hall, her flashlight dimming, her heart heavy with the words Eleanor's spirit had whispered into her soul. She now understood everything: the betrayal, the love, the sorrow that had chained Eleanor to this house for 30 long years. The hidden diary had revealed what the town had never known, that Eleanor's husband, Thomas Ray, had discovered her secret. She had planned to run away with another man, the man who had loved her long before she ever married Thomas, the town's kind-hearted doctor, Edward Hale. But love in Moonridge had always come with shadows. On the night she was to leave, Thomas confronted her in this very room. Rage, heartbreak, and jealousy consumed him. In his fury, he struck her once, twice, until she fell. Horrified by what he'd done, he buried her beneath the grand piano, sealing her spirit forever beneath the very instrument she once played to calm her heart. Now Clara understood why the piano never stopped playing at night, why the middle C echoed endlessly. It was Eleanor's call, her echo of sorrow, a note for freedom that had never come. Clara knelt before the piano, her fingers trembling as she touched the old wood. "Eleanor," she whispered softly, "I know now. I will set you free." The air grew colder. The room dimmed until the only light came from the moon through the shattered windows. Slowly, Clara pushed the piano aside, its weight resisting as if the house itself did not wish to let go. The floorboards beneath were uneven, one loose, one cracked. She pried them open with a rusted iron rod. The smell of earth and time rose into the air. Beneath the boards lay a small wooden box, its lid sealed tight with rusted nails. She pulled it open, and inside was a folded letter wrapped in silk and a ring that glimmered faintly in the moonlight. The letter was addressed in careful handwriting. "To whoever finds this, know that I never meant to stay. But love, once broken, cannot find peace in darkness. Forgive him, and let me rest." Tears blurred Clara's vision. "You've waited long enough," she said softly. "You can rest now, Eleanor." But then, suddenly, the ground beneath her shook. The candles, long extinguished, flickered back to life one by one, their flames pale blue. The portraits on the walls shifted, their eyes following her. And then, from the staircase, came the faint, dragging sound of footsteps. Clara turned slowly, and there, in the dimness, stood a shadowed figure. Not Eleanor. Not the caretaker. Someone else. He was tall, his form half real, half smoke, wearing a coat that shimmered as if made of darkness itself. His voice was low, distant, the sound of a storm whispering through the trees. You should not have come this far. Clara's breath caught. Thomas Ray. The shadow tilted its head. She was mine. My light. My song. His voice cracked into a growl. And you would take her from me? I came to free her, Clara said, her voice trembling but steady. She's been trapped here for years because of what you did. You can't keep her anymore. The shadow moved closer. The cold around her deepened until her breath turned to mist. You don't understand, he said. Without her, there is nothing left of me. Then you should have let her live, Clara whispered. The house seemed to exhale, and a bright surge of light burst from the piano, soft, silver, and warm. A figure emerged from it, glowing like the moon itself. Eleanor stood there, her eyes full of sorrow and forgiveness. Thomas, she said gently, her voice echoing like a distant song. It's time. The shadow froze. Eleanor, I have waited long enough, she said. Let me go. He reached for her, but his hands passed through the light. His form began to dissolve, the darkness peeling away like smoke under sunlight. His voice was no longer angry, only broken. Forgive me. Eleanor smiled sadly. I already have. With those words, the house shuddered once more. The wind died. The lights faded. And then, silence. When Clara opened her eyes again, she was lying outside, on the hill beneath the cold moonlight. The mansion stood behind her, still and quiet, its windows dark. But for the first time, it did not feel heavy. The air was calm, almost peaceful. Moonridge House was finally asleep. Clara stood slowly, brushing the dirt from her hands. In her pocket, she found the silver locket still warm, but now, the photograph inside had changed. Instead of Eleanor's solemn face, there was a picture of the mansion bathed in morning light, with no shadows at all. She smiled faintly. Goodbye, Eleanor. The next morning, Clara returned to town. The people of Silverpine noticed something different about the hill. The mist no longer gathered there. The air felt lighter, freer, as if the past had finally released its hold. Mrs. Lyle met Clara outside the inn, her eyes full of questions. You went there, didn't you? Clara nodded. It's over now. She's at peace. The old woman's expression softened. Bless you, child. That house has haunted this town for too long. Clara stayed one more night before leaving Silverpine. As she sat by her window, she gazed at the hill one last time. The moon shone softly over the trees, and for a moment, she thought she heard the faintest sound, a piano, playing a gentle melody. But this time, it wasn't sorrowful. It was calm.
Free.
She whispered into the night. Rest well, Eleanor. The wind carried her words away, across the fields, into the moonlit dark, and somewhere within the stars, the whispers finally stopped.